Good morning, everyone. I am Vanessa Agaron-Toro, Director of the Planning and Engineering Office of the Energy Bureau of the Puerto Rico Public Service Regulatory Board. It is 10:05 in the morning of Friday, August 13, 2021, and we are commencing the technical conference in case number NEPR-MI-2019-0005, review of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority's Comprehensive Vegetation Management Program. We are holding this technical conference remotely as a precaution to avoid the spreading of COVID-19. This morning, we are joined by the Chairman of the Energy Bureau, Edison Avilés Delis.
Morning.
And Associate Commissioners, Ángel Rivera de la Cruz.
Morning.
Lilian Mateo Santos.
Good morning.
Ferdinand Ramos Segar.
Good morning.
And Silvia Ugarte Araujo.
Good morning.
On April 11, 2021, Luma Energy LLC as Management Co. and Luma Energy Servco LLC as Servco filed before the Energy Bureau its petition submitting Luma's Vegetation Management Plan, which constitutes its proposal for a comprehensive vegetation management program. On July 16, 2021, the Energy Bureau issued a procedural calendar in the instant case where it scheduled today's technical conference. During today's technical conference, Luma shall present and discuss its proposed vegetation management plan. Further, the Energy Bureau required Luma and its consultant to be prepared to answer questions from the Energy Bureau regarding its presentation and all aspects of the proposed plan. This technical conference will be conducted in English and will be recorded in audio and video. Further, it is being streamed live both in English and Spanish through the Energy Bureau's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording of the technical conference will be made part of the administrative file of this case and will be available in the Energy Bureau's website. We will now establish the instructions to be followed during this technical conference, and afterwards, Attorney Ileana Reyes will take the oath to the witnesses that will appear today before the Energy Bureau on behalf of Luma. Before answering any question or addressing the Energy Bureau, all participants must identify themselves for the record by stating their full name, position in Luma, or whether they are a Luma consultant. Before addressing the Energy Bureau, please unmute your microphone. And please keep your microphone on mute while not answering questions or addressing the Energy Bureau in order to avoid disturbances due to background noise. Now, Attorney Reyes, please proceed with taking the oath to Luma's representatives.
Good morning. Based on the information provided by Luma's legal representation, the following Luma employees or consultants appearing on behalf of Luma have joined today's technical conference and may answer questions from the Energy Bureau. Mr. Brent Bolsinius, Director of Vegetation Management. Mr. Mario Hurtado, Chief Regulatory Officer. Attorney Mercado, please confirm that the foregoing are all the Luma representatives that have joined us today.
Good morning, Margarita Mercado, representative for Luma. Good morning to commissioners of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau and Energy Bureau employees and consultants. Yes, I can confirm that the names that you have stated are the two witnesses for Luma this morning.
Thank you. To all witnesses, when I have read the oath, please provide an audible affirmative answer for the record. Do you affirm that the testimony that you will provide today is true, correct, and based on your own and personal knowledge, and that to the best of your understanding, none of the information you will provide today is misleading or untruthful? Mr. Brent Bolsinius?
I do.
Mr. Brent Bolsinius?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mario Hurtado?
I do.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answer in the affirmative. Ms. Agaron, you can proceed.
Thank you, Attorney Reyes. Before proceeding, I would like to ask the chairman or commissioners if you have any open comments or remarks.
Not on my part.
Not on my part.
No.
Not for me.
Thank you. Then we will proceed, Ms. Mercado, with Luma's presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Acaron. Margarita Mercado for the record, yes. Mr. Brent Bolsenius will take the lead with the presentation, and he will begin with providing the Energy Bureau a short background on his professional experience, and then he will be available for questions as well as Mr. Mario Hurtado. We are able to proceed. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brent Bolsenius. I am the Director of Vegetation Management for Luma Energy. I am excited to be here today to talk through our vegetation management plan with everybody. A little bit about myself. I'm a degreed forester with also a secondary degree in business administration. I have 18 years of experience in utility vegetation management at several well-known large electrical utilities across the United States. I also hold the International Society of Arboriculture's Certified Arborist designation, along with the Utility Specialist designation. By supplementary, I'm also a professional project management professional, or PMP. Today's plan in presentation will focus strictly on the vegetation management plan that was submitted previously. We will use that plan as the framework for our discussions and the various topics today. We'll talk about each one. Some areas of the various sections will be given more attention to applicability than others. And we'll note that most of the photos in the presentation are from Puerto Rico, unless otherwise noted.
Next slide.
Next. My apologies. We'll go through each section as identified here. And without further ado, we'll start jumping into the general purpose and reason for the vegetation management plan itself. The plan itself establishes a basis for the overall vegetation management program. It's going to provide guidance for the management and plan of the organization. It's really divided into two sort of various perspectives. One is the management side of things, strategic nature of the program, the various elements associated with running and performing and executing on a vegetation program. The other portion, or the other perspective, is the maintenance, very tactical context for controlling the vegetation itself, more field operations. I want to relate, think of it that way. We'll talk about each one in extensiveness as we go further through the presentation itself. One of those big pieces associated with the management of the plan is our stakeholders, managing our various groups that would be interested in what Luma is doing to perform and maintain vegetation management. A lot more detail is provided within the vegetation management plan itself regarding to the different classifications or general groups that are listed here. However, the groups and agencies that are listed on this slide are relatively influential and also very important to establish a good relationship with. We do have several of those entities, like the U.S. Forest Service or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, other local Puerto Rican agencies like the Department of Agriculture, Department of Natural Resources, and other non-profit groups. I apologize if I mispronounced this next one, but Para la Naturaleza. Thank you, Gracias. As well as our community and governmental entities, local municipalities or trade groups will all be part of this plan and part of reaching out and working and collaborating with them at various levels within the vegetation union. Additionally, we have certain mandates, both from a regulatory or law perspective. We do have the Puerto Rican law that would be applicable to the vegetation plan. We're sure everybody's very familiar with it, but it is Section 1.16, the Puerto Rico Energy Public Policy Act, that requires a very comprehensive vegetation management plan in accordance with best industry practices. Additionally, the Act also declares an initial objective to establish priorities for the maintenance of infrastructure of the electric grid and creating a vegetation management plans. Also applicable from a legal perspective is the Puerto Rican Energy Transformation and Relief Act, indicating that the PREP, this group, will be responsible for the compliance of the T&D operator with a vegetation plan in accordance with those best practices. But it doesn't mean that the regulations end there either. Other entities, particularly some of the governmental entities that we spoke just a moment ago, also have applicable laws and regulations associated with conducting vegetation management. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, 1976, is very influential. Sometimes this is referenced or also known as NEPA. But there's also other groups that would be interested. For instance, the Fish and Wildlife Services would be interested in making sure that we adhere to endangered species. I'm sure that the government of Puerto Rico would also be interested in knowing sure that we're not polluting or discharging or impacting clear water and the various sections that are associated with the Clean Water Act. One of the other regulations that would be applicable to LUMA's vegetation management plan is actually a regulation that was crafted and implemented last year by the U.S. Forest Service. And that policy or regulation is the land use special use procedures for operating plans and agreements for power line facilities, vegetation management, within and abutting the linear boundary of a special use authorization for a power line facility. It's very lengthy. It's a very detailed prescription of regulations. LUMA will be working to ensure that that plan and policy is filed with the U.S. Forest Service and is on hand when conducting vegetation management within applicable U.S. Forest Service jurisdictions. But then there's also how are we going to do business? The best industry practices that we spoke about previously. Listed here are a few of the various industry best practices that most utilities, main utilities in the mainland USA, adhere to when conducting vegetation management. These also would maybe considered more field operational safety procedures, how to actually physically create sawdust, maybe, perhaps, another way said. One that would be governing all operations, not just within the vegetation management plan, but as an electric utility, the National Electric Safety Code. ANSI, which C-133 is the safety requirement for arboricultural operations. That is a very lengthy document that standardizes the safety procedures for all aspects associated with the vegetation management program. And that rule specifically is used most frequently on a daily basis by those creating the sawdust on the crew in the field in order to conduct a safe operation. Additionally, that same crew would be adhering to other ANSI A300 standards. And that one specifically is a standard for trees, shrubs, and other woody plant species. And it has to get into the how to actually make a cut, to properly make a cut for the betterment the health of the tree. And surprisingly, that industry standard hasn't previously been used, but also is very beneficial to us. It allows for not only the propagation of tree species, but also to heal from those wounds and not have excessive growth, which is very key, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as well. But other standards associated with just not how to leave or prune a branch includes the idea of the strategic concept of integrated vegetation management, as well as tree risk assessment. Both of these will be talked a little bit further later in the presentation, but they are parts of our plan and a part of an all-comprehensive plan that LUMA has. Additionally, these standards have been adopted or are part of a complementary of standards and best management practices that are endorsed by the International Society of Arboriculture. A lot of the standards that we saw within the ANSI standards are applicable and actually replicated by the International Society of Arboriculture, whether it's tree pruning, pruning trees along electrical lines, tree risk assessments, utility tree risk assessments, and integrated vegetation management. And these are sort of the foundational standards and practices that the LUMA Vegetation Management Plan is based on and will be used in coming years. So that's all great, but really what does this all drive towards? What's the vision? Really from a vegetation management perspective, the vision is to provide a safe and effective management strategy while maintaining harmonious relationships with landowners, i.e. in the environment. And landowners are also customers, and they may not be customers at the same time. But we will apply these methods that are site sensitive based on best practices, scientific tree care research information available. We will seek to minimize the impact of sensitive wildlife and plants, cultural resources, and other natural resources, while ensuring the safety and reliable operation of the electric grid. The vegetation management plan itself is to support the reliability of the transmission and electric service itself in a safe, economical, and ecological and environmental sound manner, stewardship, and sustainability model, which will use integrated vegetation management. We'll talk at length about that in a later slide. But all of that is wonderful. That also means that we need to have additional goals on top of it. And that's for the safety of our workers, for our contractors conducting work, for the safe and reliable service of our clients and customers. It's to ensure that the methods, procedures, and the program itself is cost effective and supports the development of on-island capabilities. That's a very key goal for LUMA to achieve. So what are some of the critical factors and how does LUMA's vegetation management get there? And it's fairly extensive. One is to ensure and to develop a centralized vegetation management team staffed by professionals aimed at eliminating public endangerment and supporting a safe and efficient work environment. It also is going to mean effectively using have dedicated funding to vegetation management. Sure is. Ensuring that tree clearances are reestablished along distribution and electrical right-of-ways. Really trying to shift from a reactive reclamation mode of operation to a steady state, some proactivity, maybe even predictive. But it also means what's going to be critical for its success is the deployment of the principles outlined within the strategy of integrated vegetation management. As previously talked about, we're going to use industry standards, best practices, establish workflows, efficiencies to ensure, manage the work, and also bring in and implementing a program that is modern. A implementation of an IT or informational technology tool to manage the work maintenance strategies itself will be key. This will help with planning, the scheduling of work, the execution of work, and the evaluation and the effectiveness of the vegetation maintenance activities. As we slide into slide 10, section 6 here, talking about the vegetation management organization. I'm going to spot this. We'll spend a little time on this topic itself. As we talked previously, or was mentioned, that the vegetation management plan itself helps guides and develops some of the strategy around the program. And this is a key piece, the vegetation management organization. Now, with this illustration, I will note that total individuals or roles are not included within the labels. We'll be able to provide that information at a later time if it becomes necessary. The overall size of the team is 47 dedicated individuals. Particularly, it is centralized. This is the one group associated within LUMA, dedicated for vegetation management across the entire island for transmission, distribution systems, and the vegetation associated with substations as well. Now, very, very key into an overall strategy of LUMA is that the function of vegetation management reports directly into operations. We have a clear line to what the lines team is doing for distribution, transmission, and the substation groups. We will work collaboratively across our platform within this overall function of operations to ensure constant communication, teamwork, and effective operations. Strategically, LUMA is divided into let me back up. Strategically, the island of Puerto Rico operations is divided into an east and west geographical area. So otherwise kind of considered two divisions. Within each division are 3 operating regions. Why would this be important for reference to vegetation management? As seen on the 2 teams on the right side of the screen, underneath the titles of Manager of Vegetation Maintenance East and Manager of Vegetation West, are the individuals that would be representing each of those divisions or regions. Each operational region would have a dedicated regional distribution arborist or a division transmission arborist associated and dedicated only for that function. This helps with operation communications, central point of contact, allowing for customers, municipals, agencies get familiar with a dedicated person for within those geographical areas. This will help also coordinate and work at a closer to the field level with groups within LUMA, whether it's the substation team or lines department, construction. And so it's very important for LUMA, has been, to make sure that we're well represented and spread out equally throughout the island to make sure we have high visibility. Our team members are going to be able to provide that service that we strive to provide. Furthermore, each East-West region will have a team led by a team of field technicians, led by field supervisor, who will assist the arborist with dedicated contract resources. These dedicated resources are only for vegetation management, line clearance work that would be taking place along the electrical system, both transmission and distribution. They would also be handling the substation, weed spraying and around the weed abatement or other vegetation controls around substations. This function, this team, these two teams, solely dedicated to monitoring and watching and measuring the success of the vegetation program. This is where the rubber meets the road or the sawdust hits the ground. This is the operational side of the vegetation management team itself. Slightly further to the left in the middle of the screen, we see another important key function within the team, the manager or vegetation programs. This function is sort of the governance or strategy piece of the program. This team will be reliant on training, creation, strategies, implementations to hand over and have executed to the operational or field teams. This team would be working to implement or create work prescriptions for projects, schedules, and ensuring that integrated vegetation management is used. They will support the overall operation, help define and monitor progress being made within the program. Equally, further left, we have the finance team as well as a dedicated quality auditor. Both of those would be focusing on ensuring invoices, expenses are controlled within budgets to ensure timely payment of our vendors, and also for tracking and monitoring execution of work. The quality auditor is a very unique opportunity within LUMA. That role itself is dedicated to working on workflows and finding efficiencies within existing workflows. Very, very impactful. Quality auditor, finance and administrative lead, and the three manager level roles all really report to me, the Director of Vegetation Management. Now, getting closer to the field, let's talk briefly, but shortly about some of the physical considerations associated with the vegetation management plan itself, particularly the transmission and distribution systems, a little bit of clearance, and a general concept of right tree, right place. The system is made up of a system, meaning the transmission and distribution system. Includes approximately 11,000 miles of overhead primary distribution lines, an additional 12,000 miles of low voltage secondary supplies. These might be street light wires or individual services, along with 2,700 miles of transmission lines. Additionally, 300 substations help support this large grid. Distribution clearances are specified as part of preventing maintenance prescribed under each project. As much as all stakeholders would like, it is the utility vegetation management industry in most jurisdictional areas acknowledge incidental conductor contact due to ingrowth will occur on the distribution circuits prior to scheduled preventative maintenance. There might be a few exceptions associated with that, but as overall, generally speaking, it's typically accepted to have incidental tree conductor contacts on the distribution system. In fact, the National Electric Safety Code recognizes incidental contact as unacceptable and does not create an expectation utilities will maintain overhead distribution systems free of any contact. LUMA's plan will seek to eliminate hard contacts between low voltage lines, trees. This will require only incidental pruning of the tree and is accomplished during routine maintenance of the primary lines. As I'm sure all of us have seen, vines climbing on structures and interfering with equipment, electrical equipment that is, also represent a significant risk. Vines themselves will be cut and treated with an approved registered herbicide. The table itself, 7.6 from the plan, summarizes tree conductor clearance requirements based off of line type, voltages, and certain line or physical asset protections within the system. As you can see, the distances will vary depending on voltage and line configurations, but it is intended to provide as a basis or a guidance for the individual clearances needed to trim vegetation along the electrical lines, the distribution system. On a bigger scale, the transmission system will establish and implement a concept considered to be known as wire zone and border zones at the time of trimming, and is consistent with the criteria provided in the associated table on this slide, as well as the vegetation management plan. The intent is to have sufficient clearances to be achieved to assure reliable services during the intervals between scheduled maintenance actions. Really, specifically, clearance expectations on the transmission system are based really applicable for IBM concepts. While the existing PREPA transmission system is not subject to NERC requirements, NERC standing for North American Electric Reliability Corporation, LUMA is voluntarily adopting several of these elements as a best practice. Specifically, NERC standard FAC-003-4. And this literally is a standard dedicated for transmission vegetation management. Talk a little bit more about that concept along with IBM and further slides soon to follow. But this slide itself is borrowed and acknowledged from an online source, but it does highlight something and promote something that LUMA is very interested to provide for Puerto Rico. The concept comes from the Arbor Day Foundation, and it's just known as Right Tree, Right Place. And the concept is to promote the planting and cultivation of trees to be properly placed to avoid collisions or conflicts with overhead power lines, while buildings experience increased efficiencies, aesthetics, and property values. And I'll pause here to point out and talk specifically to the image provided. On the far right of the screen, we have the transmission line illustration. It does show a little bit about what the wire zone looks like and how it applies to normal right-of-ways. The wire zone itself is that area of physical land directly underneath or inclusive to a certain distance outside of the overhead lines on large transmission lines. Outside of that area, or backing up within that area, it is strived to have low growing grasses and forbs to help, or otherwise known as compatible vegetation species, and to ensure low growth species are propagated to protect against conflicts with the electrical lines. As one moves a little bit further out away from the transmission line itself, taller growing species are allowed to propagate. The same concept is very applicable to the distribution side system as well. Moving to the left side of this image, one can see that underneath, labeled A, the distribution line here, has propagated low-growing tree species underneath the distribution line. These species have a mature height that would not interfere or grow into the electrical system, but yet still provide the benefits of having vegetation in trees on one property. But moving further away, larger trees are allowed to be permitted to grow and provide additional shade, energy efficiencies for the home, and create additional aesthetic for the property. This concept, while not something that could be completely implemented in a short term, is sort of is a vision or concept for long-term success. How do we get there? The next slide, we'll talk more specifically about integrated vegetation management in this particular strategy. Now, the strategy itself is sound and can be applicable to meet any vegetation objectives. Additionally, it's applicable anywhere. Integrated vegetation management, or IVM, is a structured decision-making process which begins with understanding the dynamics around incompatible species in the local ecosystem. Management objectives are set using internal and external factors, including reliability, regulatory compliance, site sensitivity, location, stakeholder consideration, and budgets. The maintenance, the actual conducting or implementation of such strategies, the field work, are defined recognizing economics and environmental factors at which specific activities are planned, prescribed, and implemented based on those sites, those project-specific conditions. LUMA's vegetation management plan is applying this approach. The objective is to ensure incompatible tall growing trees or tall growing tree species and woody plants to not interfere with critical power facilities. Using IBM as an operating model for electric utilities, the goal is to reduce the risk that an incompatible tree or plant species affects the system negatively. To the extent possible, incompatible species are eliminated while preserving and enhancing low-growing compatible plants and plant communities. The low-growing plants will compete with incompatible species, providing a biological control. By applying IBM, the goal is, and we expect, the cost and the intensity of vegetation work will reduce over time while improving reliability and safety of the electrical system. This approach also provides safety benefits, environmental benefits, and social benefits. So let's take a look at how IBM is played out in the real world. I will acknowledge that these photos themselves are of a right-of-way in Virginia. These photos were taken by a team member of mine that is on the vegetation management, the LUMA vegetation management team. And I have his permissions to share. But even though it just takes place in Virginia, the concept and the strategy is applicable to Puerto Rico. And it also is leveraged in how the plan will be presented and used in Puerto Rico in the coming weeks, months, and years. But let me start by explaining this slide. The first step is to establishing a long-term, compatible, long-term strategy with compatible tree species and plants in our right-of-way is to reduce or to eliminate the tall-growing species. Here in this picture, a heavy mulcher mower is started to use to start eliminating, to cut and mulch the existing vegetation on the right-of-way. Excuse me. My apologies. Here, the vegetation is mowed down. Moving to the next slide. The vegetation is actually allowed to grow back, ever so slightly. By mowing the right-of-way, we are releasing or resetting the conditions in that space for all species to grow. The strategy being, once mowed and allowing to regenerate, all species to regenerate ever so slowly, this allows a sufficient leaf surface to allow sufficient herbicide to be taken up to control the rootstock of the plants. One can see in this photo individuals with backpacks selectively spraying incompatible species. Now, this is can be somewhat intensive, but it's a very critical step in establishing a long-term compatible right-of-way. And I will emphasize that these photos are taken from the exact same right-of-way. This photo we see here was taken about 13 months after the clearing of the mowing. It is possible in Puerto Rico that the duration in which a follow-up selective herbicide application may apply might be a slightly less duration between those. But what is the end result? The treated corridor transitioned with the seasonal leaf drop, which I know may not exist in Puerto Rico. But one can see the effects and the benefits of the applied selective herbicide treatment. Now, while difficult to see on this slide, there are examples of blueberry bushes still growing on the right-of-way. And while there might be, to the eye, a lot of sort of yellow or light brown colors, this is merely seasonal grasses in a dormant setting. But imagine how the same operation could look in Puerto Rico. Instead of the light browns one would see I ask you to look at it and envision this right away with tall green grasses. The darker browns that we see in the image represent the tall growing species that were selectively sprayed by those resources. Previous slide. And while this image might seem stark to the eye, it's very likely in Puerto Rico it would be much, much less noticeable, given that the selective treatment of tall species easily blend in over a few weeks after dropping their leaves, not be seen amongst the green grasses and other shrubs that have grown back. And so this is the important piece that's associated with an IBM program, is the follow-up application of herbicides. Now, this picture, while again in a different climate, is just 2 growing seasons after the initial mowing. Quite a difference, quite a stark difference. There is a tremendous reduction of stem count associated with incompatible, undesirable species. In other words, fewer taller growing trees on the corridor. The benefits are endless. The ongoing preventative maintenance will be minimal, except for involving spot treatment of those targeted vegetation species. A yearly tree assessment could be conducted along the edge of the corridor. As we could imagine, long-term costs would be significantly reduced. But I mentioned earlier about the other aesthetics and other benefits associated with IBM. Now, while I note that these images were not referenced properly, they are the same right-of-way in Virginia. And upon that second cycle of treatment, the corridor and local herbaceous grasses and forbs were naturally released. These forbs and grasses are great for the local ecosystem and local and transcendent pollinators. The electrical corridors could become an asset very quickly, a short time frame, several years, in which they would become an asset to all of Puerto Rico for wildflowers, native grasses, and most importantly, pollinators. And while the IBM strategy is rooted into providing safe, reliable service along electrical facilities, there's an added benefit to all to this. It speaks to the stewardship the right-of-way itself can be. So with the vision set, how are we going to get there? As we can all imagine, there's quite a bit of work to do. The vegetation maintenance piece of things, the actual sawdust creating, it represents a continuous and repetitive process. When trees are pruned, they regrow. Oftentimes they grow faster at the cut's location. And when removed, other trees are recruited to fill in that space. Vegetation maintenance includes addressing a myriad of post-vegetation management activities. And so what that really looks at is that right now there would be back up. What that sort of looks like is there's a reactive phase, a preventative phase, and a corrective phase, each described here in the table seen. The reactive phase is really unplanned work, immediate needs, reliability, broken branches, outages. The preventative phase is more day-to-day maintenance work that has been prioritized, scheduled, and managed on a project basis, and really represents the cornerstone of the vegetation management O&M budget and program. And then there's the corrective phase. And these would be one-off requests or possibly customers calling in, needing some assistance or making an observation. Could be like Luma operations or other support groups needing some access to poles and facilities addressed. But in the long-term steady state program, this really represents 10% or less of the overall program itself. Speaking a little bit more specifically into the preventive maintenance, various factors will be taken and considered when determining maintenance cycles. Listed in the left column of this table are some of those considerations. This model or these factors can be used and will be used in determining the sequencing of various projects. Simply, it would include the time since previous maintenance. Most importantly, likely a heavy load factor would be performance, number of tree cause outages associated with that particular project or feeder or line, the type of voltage, assessments or conditions, inputs from other internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders, and also trying to coordinate with others large capital projects. Still speaking at the maintenance level, in-field work, talk a little bit further about the various methods that would be used. We saw these in the slides representing the IBM strategies. But in general, maintenance practices support a long-term strategy to establish and manage sustainable conditions along the transmission and distribution systems. In order to create a long-term sustainable right-of-way, we would be using 3 general methods. We talked about a little bit about the biological controls, using low-growing tree species and shrubs and grasses to help outcompete taller growing species. Physical controls, which could be both manual and mechanical, thus removing or removing tall-growing tree species and vines in proximity to the lines. And then we talked a little bit about the chemical or the herbicide control methods. Rest assured, applying these methods, we would be applying registered herbicides, specifically registered here in Puerto Rico, so that eliminating incompatible species from a site, encouraging the establishment and expansion of compatible plant cover, and thus trying to suppress the growth of incompatible species. Now, there's some risk into implementing this plan. The vegetation plan is a blend of takeover and remediation, and a business as usual plan. There's a certain amount of embedded risk contributed to this. The pure magnitude of the vegetation practices and process, shortcoming gaps between PREPA's current state and that of the industry norms. And also the system itself, the extreme poor reliability with safety and SAIDI values. Now, the system remediation plan includes programs to address both aspects, seeks to abate and mitigate immediate vegetation related risk, along with reclaiming the right-of-way corridors. The remediation elements of this plan call for a field-enabled IT tool spoke about previously. So where are we at today? Previous gap assessments are indicated in the left column. The desired long-term state is represented as LUMA on the far right. In the middle, sort of a snapshot of where the LUMA vegetation management program is at today. As previously illustrated, vegetation management team is now centralized under one central command. We're implementing and promoting of industry standards, promoting safety and efficient work, and we are in the reactive maintenance response initiative, and thus trying to target the largest risk to safety and reliability right now. Moving into the right column, the far right column in desirable state will take many months, possible many years to accomplish, but we are off heading in the right direction as we are today. Part of that is making sure that we have a improvement plan. As previously mentioned a moment ago, we're sort of in the rapid reactive response phase right now, attempting to identify and address the worst of the worst conditions. Followed by that phase would be the reclamation phase. This would help reestablish the conditions reasonable for maintaining the systems and provide a level setting for long-term steady state. And that steady state or preventive vegetation maintenance is that third row. Once reclaimed, implement IBM-based approach to ensure and manage tree and plant communities that are conducive along those systems. Now, along the way, we'll still need to also address corrective issues, whether it's specific reliability issues, individual customer clients request, or addressing a backlog of tree requests from LUMA customers. Each of these three supplemental vegetation activities will be sprinkled in or worked in conjunction with the three primary phases listed above. Slide 30 here represents a conceptual schedule of what these three phases look like. This one's drawn out by voltage class, indicates the amount of work, but really represents what a concept schedule looks like in terms of those three phases. The rapid reactive phase, the reclamation phase, and the steady state phase. As seen, each phase will take various lengths, as of various size and duration. LUMA's goal today is to focus on these individual phases with the goal still to reach steady state across the system within 3 years. In order to do so, there'll be significant investments, annual spends, mostly operating and maintenance costs will reach $60 million till LUMA reaches the remediated state and gains experience along the system. The initial budget establishes 5 projects focusing on the initial remediation, reactive response, reclamation, T&D systems and right away, steady state, preventive maintenance, inclusion of vegetation management information technology and advanced technology techniques. That concludes the presentation portion of the vegetation management plan. I thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Bolsinius. And then, if the presentation is finished, we will proceed to questions from the Energy Bureau to Luma.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Bolsinius. Did I pronounce that right, sir?
Very good.
All right. Excellent. This is Commissioner Rivera. First of all, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for the information and presentation and that you provided today. I do have several questions regarding a couple of aspects of your presentation. If we can go to slide 28. Let me know whenever you're there.
Yes, sir. I believe we are.
Okay. Sorry, I'm using. I had to use my own presentation because the lettering was very, very small. I'm getting old. On the gap assessment, you mentioned several problems that you found, and specifically the lack of equipment and specialized equipment for vegetation management. My first question is, what's Luma's plan to solve that particular aspect of your gap assessment, based on the fact that without the proper tools, you're not going to be able to do the work?
Absolutely. As it was mentioned, we'll be relying on contract services. We have worked and negotiated and communicated with those contractors about the needs to implement specialized equipment. Those would be certain mechanical mowers and mechanical trimmers associated with vegetation management along electric lines. They've all been very receptive and are interested in learning more about those particular tools available to them.
And what has been the response?
Very favorable. They are all very eager to have the opportunity to try new techniques, new prescriptions.
Okay. And what will be the status of acquiring such equipment as of today?
Yeah, there's definitely a procedure. Each is learning more about the tools themselves and their applicability. And as work plans become more clarified for them long term, we'd be looking at partnering with them to help procure those. And in terms of, they would be, just to be clarified, let them procure those, but helping them identify opportunities to improve their operations and to also provide a better product to Luma and its customers.
So the equipment will be acquired by the contractor and not by Luma. So Luma will not be paying for this type of equipment.
Correct.
Okay. On slide 29, want to talk a little bit about the rapid reactive response. Essentially, you stated that it's intended to identify the worst of the worst conditions. But before we go to the worst of the worst, has Luma done a field assessment? You know, I understand that you have done the gap assessment on processes and whatnot, but has Luma gone to the field and see what the actual state of the system is and the magnitude of the problem that we are facing right now?
Absolutely. There's been significant time. I've personally spent a lot of times patrolling line, driving the road, the main roads, the back roads, the cross-country lines in Puerto Rico myself personally. A lot of team members are doing the same thing, and then additionally taking and sharing information from those informal patrols. As far as the expertise or the additional aspects of it, we are starting to conduct those within Luma. as part of
I'm sorry, sorry. The transmission broke off a little bit. I didn't catch that last part.
Besides myself patrolling, a lot of our team members come with a lot of experience from the system, many years associated with the vegetation management program, and are very knowledgeable of local conditions and how and what they become. Additionally, high-level or formal patrols are occurring. High-level assessments are occurring within various groups of LUMA today and are reporting on tree conditions.
Okay. And you mentioned that this is kind of an informal phase. You know, I believe that you stated that a more formal phase is going to soon start. Is that your statement, or maybe I was a little confused on that?
Could be mistaken, but I believe the aspect was that the patrols themselves were kind of occurring passively, whether en route to other sites. And my informal patrols were speaking directly to me after on back roads, cross-country roads, and learning the vegetation conditions along those lines. Kind of an informal, impromptu, not a dedicated patrol.
Okay, understand. So
a little informal, kind of.
Understand. So you don't have. Okay, got it. Based on your experience, first of all, I was a client of Dominion Power. I was stationed in Virginia for like 3 years. Based on your experience, what will your assessment be based on your informal patrolling of the state of the vegetation? I don't want to call it management because it's almost non-existent, but the state of vegetation on the system.
I am personally very excited about the opportunity and the impacts, of positive impacts that we can provide. Now, understanding
that's great. I'm glad to hear that, because I know it's a big challenge, but that wasn't the question. What is the assessment? I understand it's a big challenge, but what is your assessment? Let's say in comparison with other utilities that you have worked with.
I'm excited for the impacts that IBM can bring. The tools and techniques associated with IBM are, as part of the conditions, are right for IBM. It is very simply trimming vegetation away from the conductors, removing tall growing species, whether it's bamboo, mango trees, and propagating low growing species underneath those right of ways. The strategy, the strategy is applicable. There's a lot of work to do. I'm not dismissing the magnitude associated with this, of the project and the work ahead, but it's can be overcome using the tools. And unlike if using your experience with Dominion as an example, that company or that part of the country has had many years associated, but they all started out where we're at today, and we're going to start that journey.
Understand. I'm very excited also about the impact that all these programs are going to have. Still, you hasn't answered my question. And can you please, based on your inspections, what is your assessment of the current status of vegetation? And the reason I'm asking this, I'm going to tell you what the reason is. PREPA has a really high non-technical losses percentage. And even though it has not been pinpointed or studied, it is my belief or my gut feeling that vegetation management, I don't want to call it management, but vegetation has a big it's a big contributor to that non-technical losses. And that's why, since you've been on the field and you have done, I haven't been to the field. I haven't, I go to the rural areas, every so often, and I can see by myself. But since you're an expert and you've been doing this informal inspections or informal assessments, I just want to hear what your expert opinion is on the actual status. I understand that we're excited. I understand that we're going to implement a lot of tools. I understand that we're going to try to get in front of this problem. And I got to tell you, I'm very excited too by the 3-year timeline that you have provided. You know, but I thought it was going to be a lot longer than that. So, but where are we at right now?
Well, I won't be able, we're at the beginning, and I can't I'd be speculating on some of the specific topic of line loss. That's not my area of expertise. But you're right, there is an opportunity to limit that, and the vegetation program will start addressing some of those concerns.
And the status will be?
As part of those other projects, we are currently conducting those high-level assessments, and those are being addressed and patrolled by various LUMA groups.
Okay. Would you say that it's worse than the average, better than the average?
I would relate to the overall picture of the system, whether it's outage count compared to other industry indices. It just depends on what the baseline of comparison will be.
By when will you say that you will have that baseline?
I wouldn't be able to speak specifically. I believe that there's a lot of various attributes associated with this question I'd like to talk more about. It is certainly very, very challenging conditions.
Okay.
And the amount of vegetation close to the lines is very significant.
Okay. Thank you. Before moving to the next, when you say the worst of the worst, can you expand or define what you consider is the worst of the worst, and give probably examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. The worst of the worst would be those conditions that would warrant immediate attention. Imminent threats where life or property was likely at risk. That could be a large tree that has been broken or is leaning against the electrical line. It could be a broken branch that's hanging above the line. It could be a large branch that has grown and is pushing down on the various conductors, or sagging, causing sag or causing a pole to bend more than designed for. Those would be possible examples of immediate concerns on the distribution side system. For transmission, it'd be because of the higher voltages, there's less margin of clearances, and so it'd be more clearance based on the higher transmission voltages, ensuring there's enough clearance so there's not a flash or a jump of electricity to the tree.
Okay.
Those would be examples of immediate threats or high priority.
Okay, understand. We're gonna come back to this in a little bit. I would like to go to the O chart that you presented. I believe it's slide 10.
We're there, sir.
Thank you. One of the problems on the gap assessments that you identified was that you had the previous system. I don't want to call it management. The previous system was a decentralized way of doing business. Can you explain what do you mean by decentralized, and what was the practice back then?
To the best of my abilities, it appeared that there was individual local control or priorities or multiple competing values within various regions of the island. One region would operate and have different priorities than a different region of an island with different priorities. There were also multiple work groups conducting vegetation management and oftentimes competing for resources, tools, and overall strategy.
Okay, but was there a overall strategy, or it was just like a regional decision type with no reporting to the central?
I would be speculating. Sorry, I would be speculating a little bit on the reporting side of it. There were multiple activities occurring. There were internal resources and there were some external resources that were occurring. I can say I've seen a little bit of reporting on the external piece of it. Some regular reporting was occurring when on projects using external contractors. I have not been able to find, and thus I'd be speculating on what was being tracked or reported on the internal resources.
Okay, understand. You mentioned that you divided the island into two regions, Region West, Region East. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Two divisions, Division West and Division East, and then you had three regions within each division. Can you confirm that?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That is correct.
all right. Right at the bottom of the O chart, you have the vegetation management of the vegetation maintenance crews. These are the people that are going to go to the field and perform the work that has been planned and directed, correct?
Correct. This is the contracted work for it. Yes.
And that was my next question. Are these Luma employees, or are these Luma employees? Question mark.
The bulk of the sawdust creation is being done by contractor work. The differentiation of Luma employees stops at the bottom of the field technician role on this organizational chart.
Okay, so essentially you created a management structure that is going to supervise these contracted crews. Correct?
Correct, sir. Correct.
Okay. And how many actual crews are we talking about?
That specific
First
number,
of all, how do you define a crew? How many people?
that's gonna vary based off of activity and need. Some crews could be generally a minimum of 2 individuals per crew, but depending on the work location and other tools, equipment, and access, could be 10 to 12 individuals on a crew at the same time. So, but I think in the spirit, if I'm hearing, I might answer this question a little bit differently, if you may, is that it'd be my estimate over, without being terribly specific, and I apologize for that, but it's going to be a total of anywhere from 400 to 600 individuals.
400 and 600 people.
Individuals, full-time employees.
Exactly, hot bodies. 400 people that are going to be divided into X amount of crews, depending on the project, the task, or whatnot. And
Yes,
all of these personnel are going to be private contractors.
Correct.
Then I understand that's a big overview. 400. How many private contractors are we talking about?
That also could vary based off of scale and scope, as well as the capabilities of various contractors. I can speak to today where we don't have 400 or 600 contractors right now. We're still utilizing the existing work contractors. The net number of contractors is 4.
4 net number of contractors that you're using right now. What is the plan for the next? Yep.
The plan from a procurement strategy would be to continue to conduct sourcing events, looking for viable contractors who are capable of the work, who are experts in the work that needs to be completed, whether associated with the various pieces of the vegetation management plan itself. Those procurement events will be ongoing as various business needs arise or conditions change. But it would be overall, the strategy is to incorporate a blend and utilization of existing workforce in the contractors within Puerto Rico, but also explore opportunities to other vendors who may not be from Puerto Rico, who provide additional strategic advantages or help us reduce operational risk.
Okay. Why do you have a contract analyst per division when you have such a limited number of contracted and expected to have a relatively low amount of contractors?
Well, it's possible that there's still a lot of associated work with those vendors and contract management. We are definitely going to be very involved in monitoring and tracking and reporting, and the resources needed to help support visibility into the operations and also for proper reporting.
Okay. Understand. Can you explain then how will be the relationship? How are these contractors going to be managed?
It's a great question.
And how who decides the scope of work? Who decides? Can you give us an overview on how this is going to be done?
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of the centralized organization that we see here. The scope of work will vary and will come from the vegetation programs group that we see listed here toward the left center of the screen. The scope of work is then sent out in a competitive procurement process, and the vendor is selected. Upon awarding of that work, and depending on the scope and the activity associated with that scope, the individuals on the right side of the screen within those individual regions, those operating regions, those regional arborists and divisional arborists for the transmission system, are responsible for overseeing those individual contracts and the performance of those vendors. They have support with the field technicians within their organizations as well to help monitor and ensure productivity and efficient operations of those contractors. And so I would, just for the simple math, I'll use an example that we have 6 distribution regions. And if we had 420 contracted employees, it'd be approximately 70 individuals per region. Now, that's very general and very approximate. The work's going to vary by each region. But they'll have individual team members. There'll be team members and Luma representative team members to oversee those workforces within that geographical area.
Understand. And that goes to my next question. And you mentioned on your presentation that these crews, let's call them crews, are going to be equally distributed throughout the island. That's going to help with the visibility of the people, everybody. Essentially, we're working everywhere. First of all, you mentioned that these are contractors. Are they going to be using Luma logos on their vehicles? That's one question that I have. Because you said visibility. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's a consideration we don't think organizationally we've asked our contractors yet to have a Luma vehicle decal, but that's an excellent question, and we can take that.
Okay. The second and more to the substantive nature. Will you agree that there are areas, for example, the mountains and the rural areas, that have a higher degree of needs than, let's say, the coastline areas?
I would agree to the aspect that there are various more physical restraints in the mountains and within the central part of the island for access, tougher terrain. Conditions may have been deferred a little bit more, and we'll agree to that. There are still very important needs close to the coastline as well. There's important infrastructure that's a different topic, but there are multiple aspects associated where work is needed, but it is fairly widespread overall.
Yeah, I understand, and I don't want to minimize. I don't want to minimize the needs on the coastlines. I'm just saying that my concern when you say we are going to equally distribute our workforce. My concern is, has LUMA taken in that decision? Has LUMA taken into consideration the factors where the actual worst of the worst or the actual more pressing needs are? Because without the knowledge of what your regions are, unless you slide Puerto Rico as a completely vertical or horizontal areas, most likely it's going to be like regional, like the ones that we have right now, probably throughout different lines. And most likely the areas where they were more deferred are going to need, especially on the initial portion, which is like remediation, right? Essentially, you describe a very aggressive remediation plan for over 23,000 miles of distribution lines and 2,700 transmission level lines. That's a lot of miles for 400 people.
Yes, it is.
So, and again, some of them are going to be more in need than others based on the nature of how the vegetation grows in those areas.
You're absolutely right. And there's a couple of questions within there that I'd like to address. One is that, yes, LUMA is taking into consideration multiple aspects associated with where work is needed. Various stakeholders, various conditions. Those, I believe, have been addressed in other documents that are provided. And I'm referencing an SRP type of prescription. The generalities we were talking about earlier about kind of an equal distribution within those regions, I understand your concerns that we want to make sure we be targeting areas that would need work for immediate concerns for all considerations. And so within those geographical regions or those operational regions would be, further refinement of crews. It wouldn't be anything uniformly X number of crews per geographical area. Would be going where the work is needed. And so it's tough to talk in generalities of, say, 70 individuals per region when maybe there is more work to be had in Mayaguez, and we need to shift some of those resources over toward Mayaguez, even though we don't want to forget some of the needs within Arecibo, for instance. So the business needs are going to fluctuate a little bit. Resources are not tied to a geographical area. They're tied to the island of Puerto Rico. And so we'll definitely be utilizing, while we try to find some home-based regions for our vendors and for our team members, if there's a need and we have to shift resources to the west side of the island because of an unforeseen issue, we're going to shift resources from the east side of the island to the west side. But we're also trying to be efficient at the same time. We'll have the proper response.
Understand, and who will make those decisions? And the reason I'm asking is because you have like 3 levels, right? You have the vegetation management, or then you have the division leaders or the division heads, and then you have the 3 different region per division. So, yeah. And the reason I'm asking this question is because, again, I understand LUMA is completely different than PREPA, and LUMA is trying to implement their own way of conducting business.
Absolutely.
But in the past, PREPA's regional management acted as their own little utilities on each of the places and on each of the regions, and that is my concern. So can you explain who will make that decision and how those needs are going to be communicated?
Absolutely. And what we described right there was some of on like our previous question, those gaps analysis that you were talking about, a decentralized function. This is the beauty of the centralized function. We can take the input from the field, from those regions, and have it input back, specifically vegetation related, back to the programs group where they're administrating the program for the island. But the other beauty of this is even a step or two above this framework. Vegetation management reports back to operations as a whole. We're in constant contact with the operational excellence team, the lines team, fleet, transmission and substation. So we're one team, and we'll be hearing those needs across the operation, not just within veg or within a region, but we're going to take those needs from those individual regions, keep it in the centralized function, and also make sure we're working with our other team members within the operations division.
Okay, understand, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Gave me a great peace of mind, if you may. Couple of things. The rapid reactive response essentially is the first step on each of the level voltage that you have, and it's scheduled for between 3 to 6. Most of them are 3 months. One of them is like 6 months. I imagine it's because of the spread out. But can you talk a little bit? What is the status of that, based on the fact that the Luma already started operations on June 1st, and we are essentially finishing that 3rd month. So has that program started? Has not started? Where we at right now on that planning purpose, on that planning area, or that part of the program?
Absolutely. And I just want to point out too that the schedule you're referencing is a conceptual schedule, so I don't want to adhere to it tightly.
I understand that it's not set in stone, but essentially this is what Luma think is going to happen, and I understand you haven't given us like a specific schedule with dates or why not. On a conceptual basis, then where are we at?
Absolutely. We're in the beginnings of that rapid response. A lot of our attention within operations team as a whole has been setting up the operations and responding to outages and restoration times for the first couple of months. It's been referenced as the high-level assessments that are occurring by other groups and starting to take place. The vegetation group, which is part of, in that high-level assessment, is part of the rapid response phase. And so we're just getting started and have been working through a few of those items. So as the assessments start taking off and the other parts of the business are able to conduct more patrols, we'll be shifting from more reactive, while supporting responses for outages, we'll be shifting over resources to start addressing these rapid repairs.
Understand. You mentioned that you expect to have a crew of about 400 people. How many do you have right now?
That number does fluctuate, but we're north of 200 total individuals.
So you have about half of it. What is the plan for acquiring the rest of the people that you estimate that you need?
We're in the final stages of a procurement process right now, working through the details and getting approvals, necessary approvals through the various agencies to complete our workforce or start establishing more work resources.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because without adequate resources, you're gonna stay on that putting out fires portion of the plan, and this is an area that we need to start moving forward if we want to get to that steady state within a reasonable amount of time. You said about 36 months. I will say probably. I'm gonna leave it there. I'm not gonna give my opinion. I'm just gonna say that needs to happen. Okay, understand. The last question that I have, and I understand that with the budget portion is on another proceeding, but it's good to know also to put it into the record of this proceeding. What is the budget, the allocated budget for this program?
The budget is going to vary from year to year. I believe the number this year for fiscal 21 to 22 is $51 million. Future years, I believe that number swells closer to $60 million annually. And those dollars are specific for O&M dollars. There could be additional influxes with as other budgets become available, whether those are FEMA dollars or other capital projects or other areas of the business.
Why the difference? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioner. Hurtado.
Hello. I think we have feedback, Mr. Hurtado. First of all, good morning.
I'm sorry, that was my fault, Commissioner. Good morning. Let's see if I can get the camera instead of the mic. Okay, there we go. Just to chime in, yeah, the budget for the vegetation management program, as Brent was saying, is $50 million this year, it's $60 million in the following 2 fiscal years. That's the budget that was part of the initial budgets, and so the $50 million was part of the approved budget for this year, and that's our plan for spending for the program. There's some possibility that some of the activities, as they're directly related to construction activities, would be included within some capital expenditures, and so that's the other part that he was referring to.
Understand, and that was my next question will be, what type of construction are you going to need for the program?
So my understanding is that some of the transmission recovery work that has to be done, if there's major work that has to be done in terms of tower placement or replacement of towers, some of the pre-construction, well, what I call pre-construction work, or it's actually part of construction before the actual structures are moved, you have to do the vegetation clearing.
Okay, understand. And why the difference between this year and next year with regards to the budget?
In terms of when we went through the calculation of the budgets and the weighing of the different objectives and priorities, I think the main reason there's a difference is just that fact of we recognize that there would be some time in getting going in this first year.
So ramp up,
and that has been the case probably more than we expected at this stage.
Okay. No one asked that. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hurtado, and thank you very much, Mr. Bolsinius. Those are the questions that I have so far. I reserve, the right to ask any further questions based on the rest of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I would like to ask any other commissioners if they have questions for Luma at this point.
I have a couple, but I'm going to refer to the vegetation plan itself, not the presentation. In page 22, the vegetation plan specifies about the U.S. Forest Service special use of permits, and it says that PREPA has a special use to work on the transmission and distribution where places like El Yunque, right? And is Luma has to apply to that permit, or it was transferred from PREPA to Luma? And if it is already obtained, or how much time until it is obtained?
Well, thank you for that question. It is my understanding that there is an expired permit that does exist. The duration of the expiration it's been expired for quite some time, to my knowledge. Would need to reference or clarify specifically with the Luma permits department. But even despite a expired permit, we are working on a case-by-case basis with the U.S. Forest Service in that forest to complete work as necessary. But we both sides agree, the Forest Service and LUMA agree, that there would be a need for a proper permit to be in place, or special use permit to be in place. And then typically I'd be speculating on specific timeframes associated with that procurement process or that permit process, but it is somewhat lengthy. And so just to set the expectation, we're talking, likely 1 to 2 years going through all of the various processes. But don't hold me to that one, but I'd have to get more clarification if more information was needed on that process.
But right now, if you have to make any work, you can do it. I mean, you can go ahead and into these places, but with consensual from the U.S. Forest Service.
That is correct. Yes. Yeah, we're tackling emergency work on a case-by-case basis, identifying work that needs to be completed or an outage, working with the Forest Service to get access and to complete those emergency repairs. Normal maintenance work would need to be considered and kind of gone through a separate process of their review, despite it not having be part of a formal special use agreement. But the U.S. Forest Service team has identified that and is definitely interested and welcomes LUMA's involvement in reestablishing that special use permit.
Okay. I have to review my question because several were answered to Commissioner Rivera. In page 42, section 9.8, LUMA talks about the customer complaints, and it says the customer complaint process includes several escalating steps that LUMA will use to resolve customer concern. But I don't see how. I mean, can you describe in a summary what are these escalating steps to resolve customer concerns?
Absolutely. I'll try to provide some clarity to that. That's a great question. The customer piece associated with our vegetation plan is very critical. LUMA is and wants to be easy to do business with for all stakeholders, particularly our clients and customers. In a traditional, maybe utility that is, from my experience on the mainland, a typical workflow would look very similar to a customer simply calling in to the customer service. And then I guess specifically to our conversation today, it would be, a question about vegetation close to a wire or a concern or a hazard that would simply get logged in a normal or utility workflow and get distributed out to the specific work team to go investigate and respond directly with the customer. And if needed, remediate the hazard or the condition that they called in about and close that ticket up with that request. That's how I would describe a normal or a utility that I've worked with workflow in the past. That duration can vary from the first time the caller calls in to the customer calling in to the completion of the tree work. Could range between 2 and 4 weeks at times. But we're always trying to, in those previous examples, always trying to make contact in a very quick matter, a couple of days fashion. We would strive within the vegetation management team to work toward that goal, to mimic some of those traditional other workflows that I've experienced elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. and 57. Not for that. Okay, I have a mark here in page 35. It says if condition reach tolerance level, where it should be initiated when conditions reach action threshold. Tolerance level and action threshold are based on considerations such as economic optimization, treatment, access. How you would know? Like you I guess you're gonna have this I don't see in this plan, I don't see any schedules or itineraries or anything like that. So I guess they will be part of the system, or how you would know that you have to see this schedule, and because I don't see it through this plan, and I was wondering if there's going to be an update. How would we know where?
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions that this plan may not actually address. And some of the questions you're talking about are the operational or those project specifics.
Mm-hmm.
This document is designed for strategy and for an insight into some of the implementation of it. It's a living document that can be refined and ongoing and updated. But in terms of the spirit of your question, talking about how to understand when action needs to take place, those various thresholds are going to be built in various parts of the vegetation operation. As pertinent to our regulations, we have to have additional routine patrols and inspections and maintenance cycles, and some of those thresholds and data will be procured and obtained through those means. The vegetation management plan also talks about the use of technologies. There's some opportunities there to establish thresholds and actionable thresholds, tolerance levels, and so it's a tough topic that could be addressed in multiple ways. And I hope I can give you confidence that's definitely part of our plan, and would welcome more conversation if you want to dive into those specifics, especially in future filings. We need to provide that type of detail.
And my last question is, one of the activities or goals you mentioned in page 23 and 24 was to form a local chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, ISA. So Luma is going to be in charge of forming that chapter here, and this is curiosity.
Well, I don't think that's the intent of a Luma-sponsored local chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture. It's an entity, a professional entity that has multiple chapters around the world, and the idea is to establish a workforce, island capabilities that perhaps there'd be interest for a local chapter or private, individuals. And it's not just vegetation management conducting for Luma. It's everybody who's an aerial bucket operator or other line clear or arborist on the island. There's definitely some other resources that might be interested in joining that chapter as an affiliate business. And that's what the ISA or International Arboricultural Chapter is about, kind of signifying and representing island capacity and propagating and the promotion of arboricultural work. And we'd hope we'd have a big workforce doing a lot of vegetation work. We'd hope we use that as a baseline for establishing that and have people interested in the field as a career.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all of my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Duarte. Any questions from other commissioners?
If Commissioner Mateo doesn't have any questions, I have one or two. I have some questions, but please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The IBM method, if you will, I'm sorry, excuse me. My concern is the IBM method might not be appropriate for most of the transmission line right-of-ways in Puerto Rico. Specifically, the 230 and 115 kV lines crossing the island from mountaintop to mountaintop. I understand that these are usually 100 plus feet high structures that carry these wires, and they go from the mountaintop to mountaintop, and there's quite a bit of vegetation under these. What is your vision? Do these even need to be maintained? What is the plan with these types of spans, if you will, of transmission lines?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And I know that the pictures represented, the slideshow kind of represent a nice flat rolling terrain that might be applicable. But don't let the terrain confuse where its applicability is at. To the example that you provided, where structures are strung across a large span, it might not be necessary to clear that corridor underneath the wires.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing, and that's where the use of technologies LUMA is going to use in different parts of the business, along with the Veg group, knowing where that conductor, if the wire is 200 feet above the forest floor, and the trees below it are 80 feet tall at mature height, and there's no way for that line to sag under conditions, and there's ample clearance, no maintenance needed. But that same span still has structures on both ridge tops, and there would be an access or need to manage the vegetation in and around those structures, or on the shoulders or slopes, the top slopes of that, where that line could still be interacting with trees or vegetation. And so you're right, we wouldn't be able to get in this example mechanical equipment up there, but we can still hand cut using chainsaws and apply some appropriate use of herbicides to control the vegetation on those mountaintops, because that's an important ecological feature on those areas. So the concept still is applicable. We won't be able to use mechanical equipment everywhere by any means. We'll have to do a lot of hand cutting at different variations, but we can still apply the concept in some very unique locations, including this example here.
Okay. So perhaps you would just build an access road maybe to the structure area, and maybe just control the vegetation around the structure.
Absolutely, because there's benefits not just for the interference with the lines. Our teams, or LUMA teams, still need to go check and inspect and do assessments, and access to those facilities will expedite the amount of time and labor and associated with that to help everybody out. Intangible value.
Okay. You mentioned that the team was about 47 people, plus the 400 or so contractors, contracting employees. So I just want to be clear that LUMA is going to rely 100% on the contractors for doing any type of field work, or are there at least one or two crews that are in LUMA, like in-house, that would be able to tackle like an emergency type of situation? Particularly, well, maybe that wasn't a good example. let's say a person calls in, like a customer calls in, and points out a tree that's inside the line, an energized line. Are the contracting crews going to be able to work around the energized lines, or is this something that then LUMA specific personnel would go in and do, or is there going to be a coordination to de-energize those lines and then the contractors come in?
The short answer is yes. The contractors would be able to complete that work. They will, and our expectation is they're line clearance certified, meaning they have the tools, the training, the expertise to work in and around electrical facilities. They have they have to be they have special training, not just any qualified, or any arborist cannot become line clearance certified. There's OSHA regulations associated with that. To the other piece of that question is that yes, the coordination within the various teams. If condition is warned, it's not safe to complete that work, whether it was a hypothetical electric utility tree crew or a contractor, safety is still number one. And so there'll be coordination taking place with LUMA resources or the control center to make sure things are in a safe environment for them to complete their work. The expectation of our contractors is that they are an extension of LUMA, but they'll be able to complete the work as if, or in a timely manner, as if there was a hypothetical in-house LUMA tree crew. That's our expectation, that there won't be a known difference by customers or internally either.
Okay. Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Bosinis.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Good morning. This is Commissioner Mateo Santos. I have a few questions. Similar to the question that Commissioner Ugarte had, I was wondering how this plan is going to be implemented in terms of scheduling all the activities and the synergies between the activities, and how often you're going to go over an area for maintenance, etc. And I wanted to ask you, when do you expect to have timelines that can start to be implemented, that the Energy Bureau can take a look at to confirm that the plan you're putting together, it's gonna be work and it's gonna be effective and cost efficient?
Thank you, Commissioner Matera. I don't mean to interrupt. It's Margarita Mercado. We would like to ask for a 5-minute biological break if the Bureau so allows, and we can come back and Mr. Bolsenis can answer your question, if that's okay.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. We'll come back in 5 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Attorney Mercado, I just want to verify if everyone on your team is ready.
Good afternoon, Margarita Mercado for the record. Yes, the witnesses are ready to proceed.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Mateo, please go ahead.
Yes, I will repeat the question since we had a break and for the benefit of the LUMA witnesses today. My question was, when are you going to have ready timelines, implementation timelines of this proposed plan that the Energy Bureau can review to gauge the efficacy, effectiveness, and cost effectiveness of your plan?
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioner Mateo. This is Mario Hurtado for LUMA. So our intent is to provide timelines and updates as part of early reporting. The vegetation management, there's a specific program that was both part of the SRP and obviously included within the budget. And at that time, we would plan to provide information on current status and future, and if there are any major changes to timeline and to achievement of the objectives or milestones.
Thank you for your answer, but maybe I'm referring to a more detailed timeline instead of, I know that you have 3 years or to achieve the remediated state, but I was thinking about how often are you going to go to one area after you started your initial work on the area for maintenance, and how frequent and that type of itinerary is what I'm referring to, because I can infer from the plan that the objective is to impact the area, achieve a state at which vegetation that is intrusive or should not be there is impacted. Then you go for selective maintenance until you achieve a cover vegetation that is acceptable in the right of way. But that would require going or revisiting the area for assessment and for any work necessary to achieve the objective. And that would require some itinerary of work that would be conducive to your objective. And that's what I didn't see in the plan. And it may have been included, but it's not necessarily, because you devise a plan and then you develop the itinerary depending on your resources and staff, etc. So that's what I'm asking for, more than updates on a monthly basis, is how in a Gantt chart can we see your timeline, deployment of contractors and everything, so we can see if this is working or would work.
I think we'd have to have a discussion about that specifically, when we would have that and when we would be able to produce that sort of a timeline with that sort of specificity.
And we do not necessarily need to see a timeline for the whole island, but a sample of representative areas and type of lines or type of systems. For example, a transmission line that is in a flat area, something on the mountains, or something in the rural residential area, etc. So we can have a sample on how you plan to implement this. And as far as I understand it, and from my review of the document that was submitted, at this point, this is a philosophical and theoretical thing. What we need to see is at least the initial plan. I do not want to micromanage this under any circumstances. That's not the objective. Is to try to see it in writing how you're going to implement this.
And you're, if I might ask, Commissioner, so and you're interested in part of that. It sounds like one of the things that you're interested in seeing is the different phases and how the different phases would play out in a specific area over a period of time.
Exactly. Particularly these first 3 years, for example, on this transmission line segment, I'm gonna go there, impact the area, remove the vegetation, and then I'll go there 2 months later to see the results and what the itinerary would be, a sample itinerary, to see how often you would be there. Because if you have to repeat this every 6 months, then maybe something is not working. The same work every 6 months, then the plan is not working. I don't think that you're envisioning, after you mow the right-of-way, going there to mow again in the same fashion as in the beginning, the same specific segment. You're trying to avoid that. Particularly, you're trying to set it up in a way that you only have to do some selective maintenance or use of chemicals. So, but we need to see some sample, at least, of that kind of itinerary of representative areas, not the whole implementation schedule or work details, but something that would give us confidence that the frequency of the work that you're proposing is going to work and that it would be cost effective when implemented.
Mr. Hurtado. We understand the question, right? I'm sorry, I was asking my colleague. Okay, we'll work on something to address that. I don't know if I can ask my colleague, Mr. Brent, how long that might take to kind of put something like that together.
Mr. Hurtado, in line with what Commissioner Manejo said, I would like also to see the budget associated with the phases.
Okay. In other words, some idea of how the expenditure of the budget matches the different phases.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think I understand the undertaking here to try to provide that kind of clarity down the road. Some of that's going to be dependent on getting to through the first rapid response phase and actually starting to do some maintenance work or reclamation work associated with this. We're still a little bit out from doing that, but I think if it's simply a conceptual idea, I think we can provide some examples or some of what things might look like in the future and things we can strive for, and then use that to compare, a year from now or something down the road to as a basis for comparison.
Yeah, I guess that some of the work is gonna be it's like a cycle, or you're gonna repeat some of them, particularly when you are assessing the results and monitoring to see if any additional work is necessary. But we need to see that those phases, and it would be also very convenient and necessary for the Bureau in this review of the plan to understand when the actual comprehensive work is going to start. How many months are you estimating that you're going to spend still reacting, and when you're really going to start with the implementation of the comprehensive plan? And we know that these are very with the state of the system in terms of vegetation, it is a big tall ask, but we need to know that to understand exactly when you're going to start the work that you're proposing rather than reacting. And reaction is going to be part of the puzzle, because you're always going to get that call from a neighbor that some branch of a tree fall and you're gonna react. But I saw from your plan that should be a minimal part of the plan rather than a big part of the plan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I welcome the fact that you recognize everything is kind of blended together here. I will acknowledge though that it's those reactive phases and those customer requests are supposed to be on a low volume level when a mature program. We're not mature right now. There were unfortunately thousands upon thousands of existing customer requests that customers for multiple years long that we're going to work through a reasonable number of them, but really focusing on the most recent and the newest ones. But you're right, it is a multi-layered approach, and it does phase in, and it's not a clean defined timeline for each phase. But I understand the undertaking, and we'll work to get you some more transparency into the data that you're looking for.
Another question that I have is that having being a PREPA customer and having been a customer who has called PREPA to deal with vegetation, in my experience, the pruning that I saw at that point in time that was being implemented was so minimal that in 3 months, the problem will reoccur. And I was wondering how your plan is gonna attack that, and how are you gonna work with the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources in terms of having a pre-agreed approach that would make sense and would effectively take us to a mature state. Because sometimes you would ask in the past PREPA employees, and why are you not removing the tree rather than pruning it? Because in 3 months it's going to be the same issue. And they would say, well, we don't have authorization for that, or we do not use chemicals, for example, to prevent the branch from having growth again, because there are some things that you apply when you cut a branch and it would not have new growth. So what would you do different, and how are you working with DNER to achieve that?
We would be, first of all, our relationship with the DNR is very, it's just new. We're getting into reaching out to them to better understand their needs. There's a lot of, each situation, each tree is a little bit different, so I don't want to get tied down to the specifics here. But you're right, that the regrowth rate of tree species needs to be considered to justify an appropriate interval before we came back for maintenance. There's some landowner issues associated with agreements around, I don't want my tree removed, or I only want this, it's a prized tree perhaps, or sentimental tree, fruit tree. And so those all are little tidbits that have to be worked out. But generally speaking, on a maintenance plan or a corrective plan like that, we would be creating enough clearance to justify a reasonable duration before maintenance needs to occur again. Some of that's going to be based, that clearance is going to be based off of a multitude of local factors, where it's located at, tree species, health of the tree, things that we'll be working with our team members within LUMA will be helping work and recognize with our contractors to recognize those when addressing the appropriate clearances needed. We identify some general guidance in the various tables within the presentation, within the document. I believe they were in section 7. Mm-hmm. Those could be part of a baseline, but every site is slightly different based off of those various parameters.
I would recommend that you engage quickly and in depth with the NER, so you have some sort of pre-agreement with them that would somehow allow you to do more intensive pruning in situations that are pre-agreed with them, with things that are completely within a right-of-way for which you have authority for the lines to be there and cases like that, or whether the poles and lines are in a serious jeopardy, because otherwise you may encounter some issues. And the other thing is that I wanted to ask is, how are you working together with your legal division to address landowner issues and your rights or PREPA's rights within the right-of-ways that are used for the lines?
Yep, Commissioner Mario for LUMA, on the last part, we have been working hard at reconfiguring the land group. It's part of a land and permits group that's working on that integrated fashion. So that group is supporting vegetation management and operations group with the U.S. Forest Service, for example, the permit that Brent mentioned. And then that group also has the responsibility for interacting with landowners and making sure that the rights of way, the PREPA's rights of way rights, sorry for the redundance, are respected, and that, that in some cases we have to clarify what those property rights are. And how we're going to work with the landowner to assure access and then assure that we can do the right vegetation management. We're still building that group. A big part of it will be having a trained team that can help do that interaction and has the access to both the records and the specific information on the landowner so that they can make the contact, support the operations team and the vegetation management team when they're in the field. So the idea is that they are going to work very closely together so that we can address that adequately.
Perfect. And my last question is, are you considering the use of technology to reduce patrolling costs, like using drones or things like that in difficult access areas would allow you to understand and reassess what the situation is without having to use too much people to do that, or vehicles?
Absolutely, we are. Whether it is the unmanned aerial platforms, could be other technologies to quantify distances. Sometimes LiDAR has also been used in the past. Satellite imagery is starting to become an industry practice as well, to sell various pieces of it. Desktop operations or patrols from ortho or oblique imagery is definitely a thing. So I think it turns into the business case, in terms going back to that cost analysis associated and ensuring the safety of our team members. If it can be done more efficiently and safer, I think that's any technology that can provide that should be explored. So yes, we are looking specifically with the Veg group at some of those technologies.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you very much for the information you have provided today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask commissioners if they have any additional questions or comments at this point.
Not from my part.
Not from my part.
Me neither.
I just want to make sure that LUMA, or hope that LUMA reach this vegetation plan and the operation fully operated in 3 years. So I hope every goal that is set here is done. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Luma and Attorney Mercado if you have any comments or statements that you need to do.
Thank you. Margarita Mercado, for the record. I do have one clarification to provide the Bureau reference to a filing that was made in the SRP proceeding. Earlier this morning, Associate Commissioner Rivera de la Cruz posed some questions and issued some statements on service interruptions and the interaction with vegetation and Luma's assessment on those conditions. And in the SRP docket, which is NEPR-MI-2020-0019, that's the docket number, the SRP, the gap assessment is filed as attachment 1 to request for information 001. And the pages where the reliability assessment were made and include statements on vegetation management and outages are found in pages 65 through 73. And it's a confidential filing, but it's part of that record, and we respectfully request that the Bureau consider this and in its analysis of vegetation management for questions of our Commissioner Rivera. That will be the state. I don't think the witnesses have other statements aside from thanking the Bureau and the Bureau employees for giving Luma the opportunity to present a detailed explanation of the vegetation management plan.
Thank you, Attorney Mercado.
Thank you.
Then I would like to thank everyone for your participation during this morning. And we are going to conclude today's technical conference at 12:31 of August 13, 2021. Again, thank you, everyone, and have a great lunch and afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.